A couple of summers ago, my girlfriend and I were camping in Shawagaman National Forest in northern Wisconsin. And after our experience, we do not plan to return unless with a large group of people. My girlfriend and I are from Chicago, so northern Wisconsin was our go-to place for R&R. We've done a number of hiking trips in northern Wisconsin and up in the UP, but never to this area. We are not backpacking experts, but we have been to a number of national parks and have been out hiking and exploring when we can find time away from work. We absolutely love getting away from people and relaxing in nature. But this trip made us appreciate the presence of other people around us in unfamiliar places. Our plan was to hike a remote section of the North County Trail. The North County Trail is a national scenic trail, just like the Appalachian Trail, but it gets much less use. In some parts of northern Wisconsin, the trail is very remote, and the only access is via logging roads. We plan to hike 15 miles along the trail to a backpack shelter, spend the night, and hike back to the car the following day. We spent the night at a friend's house in Wausau, and we set out early the next day to the trailhead. As we entered the national forest boundary, we were captivated by the beauty of the thick green forests. I drove slowly along the gravel logging roads as we made our way to our parking spot. While we were driving to the trailhead, we passed a couple of people standing next to a parked truck on the side of the road. They appeared to be hillbillies, as they had a rusted-out, bunged-up pickup truck, complete with Confederate bumper stickers. As we drove past, I waved, and they stared back without returning the greeting. Friendly people, I thought to myself. After we passed them, I looked in the rearview mirror and noticed they were still staring at us. And before we rounded a bend, I glanced back into the mirror again and saw them watching us through the haze of road dust. My girlfriend and I joked about the up north people, but we didn't think anything of the encounter. Aside from those people, we didn't encounter anyone else on the remote logging roads within the national forest boundary. We found the trailhead about 15 minutes later, after winding our way on the narrow logging road. There was nobody else parked at the trailhead, a perfect chance to get some needed solitude, fresh air, and relaxation. After parking and making sure the car was locked, we hoisted our packs and set off on the trail. The weather was relatively cool, which thankfully kept the mosquitoes and biting flies at bay. We took pictures along the way, and we marveled at the lushness of the forest and the topography of the glacial moraine. After a solid 8 hours of hiking, we found our campsite. It consisted of a wooden backpack shelter and a fire ring. Even though the shelter provided ample space for us, we opted to set up our tent in a small clearing about 100 feet behind the shelter. We built a fire at the shelter fire ring, and I boiled water for our dehydrated trail food. As we ate, we watched the sky slowly turn dark. My girlfriend and I passed around an Nalgene filled with wine, and we marveled at how many stars you could see away from the city. When the fire was reduced to a small pile of glowing embers, we decided to head back to the tent. We settled into our tent and looked through the pictures we took that day. But after lugging a heavy pack for 15 miles and drinking some wine, I was ready for some shut-eye. When we camped at state and national parks, I usually wore earplugs. But that night, there were no RVs or other campers to make noise, so I closed my eyes and let the noise of the forest lull me to sleep. My girlfriend was very uneasy that night, but she normally had some apprehension whenever we were sleeping away from home. I'm not sure when we drifted to sleep, but we awoke to a bone-chilling noise. It was pitch dark outside, and over the insects in the forest, I heard a dull thud. It sounded like somebody was hitting two logs together. My girlfriend and I were wide awake at this point, and we lay silently in our tent hearing the noise again. Our old tent had mesh windows, but the backpacking tent we were using had no window. We could only guess at what was making the noise outside our tent. We initially thought an animal got out our food and garbage bag, which we left in the shelter, but the noise was too distinct, and it didn't sound like rustling through food wrappers or our camp equipment. Our hearts were pounding as we heard the persistent knock in the darkness. Unarmed and scared shitless, we didn't know what to do. I would normally have carried a can of bear spray, but I decided to leave it at home to save on weight, against the wishes of my girlfriend. Knocking continued, but we remained still as to not give away our location. For all we knew, whatever was making the noise had already spotted our tent. After what seemed like forever, the knocking sound ceased. We lay in complete silence with only the dull buzz of insects in the background. Then we heard it. Leaves rustling, a branch breaking, and voices. We heard low talking in the distance, but we couldn't make out what was being said. It sounded like a couple of voices talking in the distance. The voices continued for a bit, but to our relief, the voices didn't seem to be getting louder. Whoever was out there did not spot the tent or decided to leave us alone. We sat in our tent for the rest of the night, adrenaline surging through our veins. At the first light, we slowly got out of the tent. I looked around in all directions to see if anybody was out there, but I only saw the forest and the backpack shelter. We quickly rolled up our sleeping bags and camp pads and put our tent away. When we got to the shelter, my girlfriend screamed in horror. At the entrance to the shelter, the wood was freshly cut. The word kill was cut into the shelter wall, and there were a number of axe/knife cuts where somebody was chopping at the wall. I looked at the ground and saw a scattering of fresh wood splinters. After grabbing our food supply and garbage bag, we got the heck out of there. We were nearly jogging with our gear as we made our way back to the car. I kept glancing back over my shoulder and gazing out through the woods to see if anybody was following us. We traversed the glacial eschers that we saw the day before, and we knew we were getting close to our car. We were quietly rejoicing as we neared the trailhead. We made it back to the trailhead in near record time, but something was wrong. The windshield wiper on my car was sticking straight up, and there was something stuck to the wiper. As we inched closer to the car, I saw there was blood smeared on the windshield and a squirrel carcass impaled on the wiper blade. Hair and blood were still stuck to the wiper and on the hood of the car. I didn't even bother cleaning off the car. I threw our gear in the trunk and I sped off without removing the animal from the wiper blade. As I sped down the gravel logging road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't see anything through the cloud of road dust behind the car. When we got to a gas station by the nearest town, I removed the carcass with a wad of newspaper and I tried to remove as much dried blood as I could. I filled up on gas and we didn't stop until we made it to Milwaukee. This was the last trip I took to the woods of northern Wisconsin. My dad is a logger, specifically one who operates a tree saw, which is basically a giant machine that is capable of cutting down massive trees and cutting them to a specific length, which means he spends a lot of time alone in the deep forests. The way my dad's logging crew was set up is that he would be told where he is supposed to cut down trees, and he would go do that and be paid based on the number of trees he cut, not on how long it took him. So my dad used to work 16 to 20-hour days constantly to get done as quickly as possible, and then the rest of the crew would come clean up the trees and ship them to the mill. He used to work around 50% of the time alone and the rest of the time with another tree saw operator named Renee. They would use radios to communicate back and forth when they were working together. This is relevant down the line. So sorry for all the backstory, but this is the start of the story. My dad and Renee were put on a new job site and were about 10 days in, and everything was going as planned. But they were constantly hearing weird chitter-chatter over the radio that was such poor quality, no words could ever be heard. And whatever radio channel they changed to followed them. As they progressed through the job and went farther up the mountain, the words from the radio slowly became more audible. Both of them agreed, based on the small parts of conversations they could hear, that something was wrong. They also started finding weird containers all over the place and signs that people had been there. People should not have been here. This was a 2.5-hour drive up a mountain. They had to spend 3 weeks clearing out the road so their trucks and equipment could make it up. They come to the realization that they're in a very secluded area with people who shouldn't be there, and the worst part is that they aren't scheduled to leave for about another week. They would only leave to refuel the fuel truck with gasoline for the machines. They would buy supplies and sleep in campers. One day, Renee comes across a tent and calls my dad over. They investigate the tent and find one lone sleeping bag and a duffel bag. They investigate the duffel bag and find many pairs of children's underwear and things that appear to be a murder kit, like rope, duct tape, disturbing images that I won't go into too much detail about, and photographs of people that appear to be unaware that they are being photographed. In the tent, they also find a small amount of food, which includes canned goods and an apple, which proves the tent has been occupied recently because there was no mold on the apple. They are now on the mountain alone with, at best, just a really messed up individual. Renee instantly wants to get the heck out of there, but my dad, being the hardest working person I've ever met, insists that they need to finish the job and get the heck out of there after. They decide that they will not talk over the radios except in cases of emergency and see if they can hear something over the radio. They are now in close enough range of whoever has been talking over it to hear the conversations between two men about collecting water and wood for the fire. Nothing abnormal except for the fact that these guys don't really belong here and that the tent was undoubtedly theirs. At the end of the workday, my dad hears them on the radio talking about one of them collecting brush for a fire. My dad hops on the radio and attempts to communicate with them about what the heck they are doing. I believe he said, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" After this conversation between the men abruptly stops and they never pick up. That night, Renee wakes my dad up and whispers for him to get his gun, because somebody's outside. My dad has told me that the first thing he hears when he wakes up is the quiet shuffling of footsteps. My dad fumbles for his gun and finds it, but realizes that he doesn't have it loaded and has little clue where his rounds are, and Renee has nothing, and the thought of calling the police was absurd for multiple reasons. They hear a jiggle on the doorknob, and it opens. The camper is far enough off the ground that you have to jump in, and there is no ladder or footstool. It just stays open, and neither my dad nor Renee moves. They hear scratching right outside the door, though. After only a few minutes of scratching, my dad can no longer take it and nods at Renee. He gets up quietly and walks towards the camper door, and the second he reaches it, he is met with intense pain across his right eye, all the way to his left cheek. He has been cut and falls out of the camper, hitting the ground hard. A man with a knife gets on top of him, and he is soon being kicked in the top of the head by a man behind him. Renee leaps out of the trailer and manages to get the man off my dad, and my dad gets up and realizes that the second man without the knife is running away, and the man with the knife is scrambling away from Renee and starts running alongside his accomplice. My dad and Renee get into the truck and drive to the nearest hospital to treat my dad's cuts and later report the events to the police. They both quit their jobs, and 2 weeks later, as the rest of the logging crew was finishing up the job, one of them was found gagged, bound, possibly assaulted, murdered, and thrown into a ditch. No one has ever been convicted of these crimes. To this day, my dad can hardly see out of his right eye, and the pupil is disfigured and looks more like a cat's eye than a human's. He also suffers from PTSD from these events and hasn't slept a good night's sleep since. When I was a junior in college, my friend invited me to attend a ballet with her and a teenage girl that she knew from back home. The girl was part of an educational advancement program that had placed her in a nearby high school and provided free room and board in a group home with other students. All of her housemates had gone home for fall break, so my friend thought it would be nice to take her out for a girls' night, away from that big empty house with only her program advisor for company. It was about midnight when we got back from the ballet. Since we were in possession of a 16-year-old overdue for curfew, it seemed important to get her home as quickly as possible. The girl's house was fairly close to a student shuttle stop on the far end of the campus, so we figured we'd walk her home before doubling back. While moving up a footpath that leads into town, we realized her house backed up to the arboretum on the edge of campus. Rather than walk all the way around, we decided to cross the arboretum. We didn't have flashlights, but my friend's iPhone flash could serve in a pinch, and the stretch of woods was sandwiched between the brightly lit windows of our dorms and those of the houses across the way. Several minutes into our hike, we lost the sight of the footpath in the dorms. It was much darker now, and my friend was less certain that we were walking the right way, so we paused to check our location. As we were all huddled, motionless, around my friend's phone, we heard a twig crack behind us. We turned around to find a young woman, presumably a student, standing a few yards away. Her hoodie was pulled up over her head, obscuring most of her face. She seemed enormous, but given that I am only 5'3" and was flanked by 2 5-foot ballet dancers, the threshold for enormity was low. She was silent for a moment, then asked us where we were going. "We're heading into town," my friend answered. "Where are you going?" "What do you need in town?" "We're taking her home," my friend pointed to the teenage girl. "Where does she live?" "Not too far. Where are you going?" "Do you know how to get there?" She then started to walk closer to us. The teenage girl grabbed a fistful of my coat and inched closer to me. "Yeah, we figured it out. Are you going toward campus or into town?" "Which way is it?" "Her house." She was now within a few feet. Her approach had slowed but not yet stopped. My friend quickly blurted out, "Just this way. Good night." She was bluffing, but any direction away from the student seemed like the right direction, so we went along. The plan was a failure, because within seconds, I could hear her crunching the leaves just behind me. She was following close enough to touch me, and I sped up, certain I was about to get a knife in my spine if I didn't get away. When my friend saw me rushing, she turned back to see the student following us. She grabbed the teenager's hand, and the three of us began to run. We never turned back, so I'm not sure how long the student followed. Eventually, we figured out we were running the right way when the teenager yelled out, "Hey, that's it," and led us to a driveway where we could huff and puff ourselves back to normal, under a garage-mounted floodlight. The girl's program advisor was home, waiting up for her missing ward. Mance made us each a cup of tea while we waited for the campus police to drive out and escort me and my friend back to our dorm. Once safely in the back seat of a college security vehicle, we told the officer why we wanted a ride instead of walking back. He said this was the third time this semester they had picked up students running scared from the woods after encountering a strange girl in a hoodie. They dispatched officers to look into it before, but they never found anyone. He figured it was just a student on a stroll from the dorms and had nothing to worry about. As soon as we got out of the car, my friend got a text from the teenager. He was certain she'd seen the student outside her window, but when the program advisor went out to investigate, nobody was there. I never did find out what happened, but I really hope the creepy girl in the woods is not the same student whose body was found out there a year later. I hope she had nothing to do with that at all. Back in 2008, I was a student planning to go to university and needed some extracurricular stuff I could put on my entry applications. As most UK students know, one of the best to have on there is the Duke of Edinburgh Award. As part of this award, you have to embark on the orienteering expedition, which is basically a long trek through woodlands and rural villages, following nothing but a map and compass. No GPS allowed. It's a teamwork experience and you camp and overcome hurdles together, etc. Anyway, I was out of shape at the time and so my uncle volunteered to take me out to the middle of nowhere to get some idea of what orienteering was like. We didn't stay out overnight like what I would have to during the real thing, but we hiked maybe 10 miles through woods and a small village and pretty abysmal weather. By the end of the journey, we were soaked to the bone and pretty miserable, looking forward to getting back to the car and heading home. For the last part of the journey, we were on a dirt trail heading uphill with bushes and trees on either side. We were marching onward in silence at this point when all of a sudden, there was a rustling in the foliage to our left. From behind a large bush stepped an old man in a black suit with a red bow tie and dress shoes. He looked to be late 70s, maybe early 80s, very pale with liver spots dotting his face and a gray-white comb-over. I was instantly weirded out. I mean, who dresses like that to go into the woods? The instant thought on seeing a guy his age out there in those clothes and those weather conditions was, this guy has absolutely lost his marbles. There was something else that took me an extra moment to notice though, that puzzled me. The guy was bone dry and didn't even have mud on his shoes. We stopped in our tracks and just stared at the man for a moment, who appeared to be as frozen and shocked at seeing us. My uncle made the first move, taking a step towards him and asking him if he was alright. The old man continued to stare for a moment, not moving even a twitch, then became suddenly very animated. It was like he suddenly snapped out of a trance. He started flailing his arms wildly, saying something awful had happened, that a good friend of his needed help. He began walking backwards into the woods, motioning us for him to follow, which we did. We started off at a brisk walk, then escalated to running as we struggled to keep up with the old man. After maybe a minute, he disappeared ahead of us, but we could hear him still, so we continued to follow the noise until we reached a huge slope. We stopped at the edge and looked down to see the old man standing at the bottom, motioning us and pleading with us to follow him. I remember looking down and the slope was probably at a 40-degree angle, spanned for perhaps 50 feet or more, and was slick with mud. It looked like an accident waiting to happen, especially given there were no shrubs or roots to hold onto or anything. I remember looking down at the old man and on the other side of the slope and wondering, how the heck did he cross that so quickly and so cleanly? I mean, at that distance, it's hard to see fine detail clearly, but I swear he still didn't appear to be wet or muddy at all. My uncle and I looked at each other, and I saw that he was getting as weirded out as I was. Despite my feelings, I made a step toward the edge and was going to try and make my way down when my uncle grabbed me firmly by the arm and pulled me back. Under his breath, he said to me, "Something's wrong here." We took a few steps back from the edge at this point, and the old man at the bottom started getting irate. He began pleading with us again to come down the slope, telling us he needed our help, and that his friend was in deep trouble. My uncle shouted down to the old man that he would head back to our car and call the emergency services for him, that professional help would be on its way soon, that they would have all the tools to help him, etc. The old man suddenly got furious and he began jumping up and down, demanding that we come down the slope right now or there would be hell to pay. His voice had changed drastically. He was practically growling his words, with his hands bunched up into fists, pounding his knees like an angry toddler throwing a tantrum. I've never seen a grown adult fly into such a rage in my life. His eyes looked like they were on the verge of bursting out of their sockets, his skin gone from pale to red in almost an instant. We began to hurriedly make our way back the way we came, but his demands and threats getting less audible as we got closer to the trail. Once on the trail, we practically power marched the remaining quarter mile or so to the car. All the while, my uncle was on the phone to the emergency services, explaining to them that there was a possible mentally ill old man wandering the trail. We were ordered to get to our car and await the police, so we would show them where we had encountered them. About an hour later, we met 4 officers, 2 of whom had dogs with them and packs of supplies like first aid, emergency blankets, etc. We led them to the exact spot and then pointed to the 2 officers with dogs in the direction he led us through the bushes. The search lasted all weekend, but there was no trace of the old man. Officers said the only trail they could pick up had been mine and my uncle's. They didn't find any footprints or anything belonging to the old man we encountered. One of my weirdest experiences to date. This story happened about 2 years ago while I was in university working on my degree in biology. I had signed up for a trip to gather samples for an experiment some students in the ecology department were going to run. It required the collection of samples from several sites, so they recruited biology, ecology, and forestry majors to help them complete the sampling in a shorter period. The area my group was to take samples from was a few hours from a university in the Pacific Northwest. There are 9 of us in my group, 8 students and a supervising professor. We got to the campsite in the late evening and set up our tents. One of the other students had brought a big container of spilt pea soup from home and was sharing it with the others on the trip. I don't really care for split pea soup, so I declined the offer. Everybody had some except for me and one other student, and the professor. Come the next morning, the students who had eaten the soup weren't in the best of shape, like 5 of them. They were in the grips of some gnarly food poisoning and were in no shape to hike for 8 or 9 hours to collect the samples we needed. The professor who was supervising us originally had some rules, such as people traveling in groups of at least 2, and we had to return to camp by nightfall. Now, those rules were tossed out to make sure we kept to our timetable and collected all the required samples. We were just told to do your best to complete the work assigned as long as you can do it safely. That morning, I set out for a long day of hiking. After a mile or so, I ran into the stream that I was supposed to follow. I needed to travel about 4 miles upstream, stopping every quarter mile to collect samples of the water and soil. This meant I had to hustle to get back before dark. Halfway through the day, I realized that wasn't going to happen. About 2 miles into my hike, I stopped for lunch, sitting on a log overlooking the stream. The scene was really peaceful until I smelled the cigarettes. It wasn't the smell of a cigarette being smoked, more the musty smell of a heavy smoker's car where cigarette butts had been left to ferment for weeks on end. I looked around but couldn't see anyone. I just assumed that the wind had blown the scent of some hunter or hiker over to me. But minutes later, the smell hadn't faded. The vegetation in the area wasn't that thick, but there were still lots of places for somebody to duck behind a tree or bush. I was unnerved that somebody was apparently staying close enough to me for me to smell them for this long without so much as a word. I quickly packed up my trash for my lunch and continued up the stream. The musty cigarette smell went away for the next few hours. It wasn't until I arrived at my last sample location late into dusk that I smelled it again. The woods were getting really dim by this point. Looking back on it, it was a really stupid idea to stay out so late, as just hiking back to camp in the dark would be pretty dangerous even without a cigarette-smoking stalker. Having just put the collection tubes in my bag, I shined my flashlight around the darkening woods, looking for whoever was giving off that smell. I didn't see anything that caught my attention. It would actually be more correct to say I saw too many things in the dim light that might have been a head sticking out from behind a tree or somebody crouched low in the foliage. I didn't like the idea of being in the dark woods with a stranger who, for the second time, was lurking near me without revealing themselves. So I began to double time it back down the stream. I made much better time on my way back, even though it was dark, because I didn't have to stop to take any samples. Even so, I didn't get back to camp until a bit before 10. I was the last one to get back, and everybody but the professor was already asleep. I didn't mention the cigarette smell to the professor because he seemed tired as it was, and he headed to his bed in the RV soon after I got back. I headed to my tent soon after. At some point in the night, I woke up needing to pee. I decided to head into the woods to do my business, as I knew some of the other students were still feeling ill and needed the RV toilet for more urgent matters than just having to take a leak. I walked out about 100 feet into the woods, found a tree, and did what I needed to do. As I turned to go back to camp, something caught my eye. Somewhere off in the woods was a tiny red glow. I was confused as to what it was until it flared momentarily, and I realized it was the cherry of a cigarette. I stood there for a while, watching the red ember glow and fade, then moved slightly closer to the ground, as whoever was smoking would take it out of their mouth. Not being able to see the person, I assumed they were watching the camp. I didn't know if they had seen me make my way into the woods or not, as the fire had been doused and the moon was only half full, so there really wasn't very much light. I made my way back slowly to camp as quietly as I could and entered the RV to wake up the professor. I told him about the person smoking in the woods and about the smell of cigarettes earlier that day. However, when we got outside the RV, the ember from the cigarette was gone. My professor woke the other student who hadn't come down with food poisoning, and we took turns watching over camp. I didn't see or smell anything else when I was on guard duty, and I went to sleep when the professor woke up for his turn. In the morning, the professor, the other student, and I went to where I guessed the smoker had been standing the night before, and sure enough, we found about 10 cigarette butts on the ground next to a tree. The tree itself looked like somebody had been twisting and stabbing a knife or other sharp object into it, as the bark and outer layers of wood had been damaged and chipped away. The professor decided that the group should head back that day, even though we hadn't collected all the samples and were assigned to be on the safe side. We packed up camp and drove down the thin dirt trail without incident. The second we got onto the paved highway, though, a white paneled van pulled out of a clearing just off the shoulder and began following us. This van stayed behind us all the way back, pulling off the highway when we did, taking the same surface streets that we did, and only stopped following us when we turned onto the road leading to the university campus. Everyone was freaked out by this, but it was around 9 at night on a weekend, so the security office on campus was closed. We decided to unload the RV and call it a night, as the van hadn't followed us onto campus. I offered to help the professor catalog and store the collection tubes from our trip, so it was another couple of hours before I left the biological sciences building and started heading toward the dorm building I lived in. I stepped out into the cool night air and began walking, my professor having left the building in the other direction to get to his car and drive home. I was a couple dozen feet outside of the building, which was now locked, when I was hit with the musty smell of old cigarettes. I looked around, and about 25 yards away in the darkness of the footpath, I saw the cherry of a cigarette smoldering away. I was pretty scared at this point, but hoped it was only a student or some faculty staying late having a smoke, although I couldn't completely convince myself of this, as the musty cigarette smell was the same as what I smelled in the woods the previous night. I started down the footpath and soon passed whoever was smoking. 100 feet or so later, I looked over my shoulder and saw this cigarette cherry bobbing in the darkness. The smoker was following me. This creeped me out a bit more, but I still held it together. That is, until I rounded a small stand of trees and saw a white paneled van parked alone in a parking lot. I took off at a sprint toward my dorm building. I looked over my shoulder a few steps into my run. I saw the cherry of the cigarette fall to the ground and a dark shape beginning to move after me. I didn't look back again, but I could hear somebody running in the grass of the footpath. I got to the entrance to my dorm building and frantically waved my key card in front of the card reader that controlled the door lock. As soon as I hear the soft beep, I opened the door, jumped through the doorway, and shut the door quickly. I stopped and peered through the glass door, and I saw the dark shape stop just short of the lit pathway. I just watched for a minute or two, then I saw the spark of a lighter. The light was just barely bright enough to illuminate a shaggy beard and the brim of a baseball cap, before it disappeared and was replaced with the red glow of a cigarette. I turned and headed up the stairs to my dorm room. By the time I got to my window overlooking the same yard I had just run through, there was no trace of a dark figure or a cigarette cherry. After that, I didn't see that white paneled van again or smell that musty cigarette smell, and I hope I never have to.